Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Faith and Pop Culture Podcast. I am your host, Daniel Blackaby, and I am joined once again, as I always am, by the one, the only, Naya Carlson. How you doing today, Naya?
I had a word ready this time. I think it was feign. I'm feeling feign today.
You crumbled under the pressure of all your Shakespearean research, but hey, I could use a little bit more of that. And I think I've done a little feign today too, because this is another fun episode where I know you particularly, Naya, like to have guests on these episodes, so you just don't have to listen to me talk quite as much. But we are excited today to be joined by a very special guest, and that is Mr. Jeffery Overstreet. Naya, why don't you introduce our guest for today?
Of course, yes. So Jeffery Overstreet is an associate professor of creative writing and film at Seattle Pacific University. He is formerly senior film critic at Christianity Today, with his work published in journals like Image, Paste, Comment, and others. And he has written a fantasy series called the Auralia Thread series. I hope I'm saying that right. And 2 memoirs on cinema and faith called Through a Screen Darkly, and most recently Lost and Found in the Cathedral of Cinema, which comes out this month. So welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being with us.
So great to be with both of you, and congratulations on pronouncing Auralia right on the first try.
Yes!
I have heard so many variations on that I have made myself a promise. If I ever write fantasy novels again, and I will, I'm going to prioritize pronounceable names.
What was the worst pronunciation that you got?
The worst, and this had more to do with the show host having really not paid any attention to what even genre of book this was. He welcomed me to a live broadcast where he asked me what it was that sort of kindled my curiosity about Australia. I'm like,
no.
And I just chose right then and there to ignore what I had heard and just say the character name Auralia as often as possible. But then more recently, down at the Hugo House in downtown Seattle, I was interviewing the author of the first authorized biography of the composer John Williams. And the woman introduced us both there. And she pronounced Auralia in a way I'm not going to say right here, just because I want you to arrive at that pronunciation on your own and have a good laugh. Just say it was rather anatomical in nature, but I'll just leave it at that.
See, I think with the first one, you should have just leaned into it and just done the rest of that broadcast in an Australian accent. And
would have had to practice that, but yeah, that would have been fun.
But we're excited to have you on to talk about your new book and just your insight into film and your experience. I was looking just before we started recording. I was like, this seems some of your work seems familiar, and I was looking on my bookshelf, and I actually found I have you've been looking over my shoulder for. I will admit I have not read this book yet. I tend to buy books faster than I read, so it's. At some point before I die, I will get to that. But I have read your newest book, Lost and Found in the Cathedral of Cinema. I actually read it on an airplane just recently. A lot of great stuff in that book. So we're excited just to jump in, kind of pick your brain a bit about this book and your experiences. And I will say before we get into some of the hard-hitting questions, that I knew right off the start that I could trust you and that you had instant credibility. Because an early chapter in this book, you did make the objectively true statement that your favorite Disney movie is in fact Emperor's New Groove. And I think as soon as I found that out, I can trust this guy. I don't know what he's going to say the rest of this book, but he clearly has a strong grasp on cinema if he's dropping Emperor's New Groove in an early chapter.
All I can say about that is squeakity, squeak, squeakity, squeakity, squeak. Yes.
Yeah.
Any animated film that has Patrick Warburton doing a voice is already a good idea in my book. So yeah.
Yeah, that movie has been quoted I have young kids, and we can definitely quote that entire film. But so to get into a little bit first, we'll get into some general questions just about your take on film and kind of the power of cinema and from the perspective of faith. Maybe start off just sort of personally some of your own experiences, because this is a unique book. I read a lot of these types of books, and this is sort of my area of study, and I don't know if I found a lot of that take this perspective necessarily. I think there are a lot of books kind of written from a faith perspective that that kind of talk more theoretically about how films can impact us and how you engage with films, and kind of a more like a philosophical level. But this book, you take a very, it's written in the form of like a memoir. Take a very kind of personal approach, using really your own life as like the case study for what you're unpacking. What was, I know maybe your first book did a little bit of that too, but what was sort of your inspiration for approaching the topic from that kind of memoir personal perspective?
Well, Through a Screen Darkly, way, way, way back in 2007, maybe even before you were born, I don't know, was what was sort of a response to a flood of angry mail that was coming into me when I was a film reviewer for Christianity Today. At the time in Christian media, the typical response, the typical quote unquote film criticism was more about warning parents about how dangerous movies could be for their kids. And there was sort of this morality checklist, right, of how much swearing is in this film, how much violence is in this film, how much sexual content is in this film. And there was no cinema literacy. There was no really, this is not how people in the world talk about the arts, we don't approach a Shakespeare play and go, well, how many words in here could be considered expletives? Is there any sexuality being expressed in Hamlet? And we don't approach Bible stories that way too within Christian culture traditionally. We're well aware there's lots of sexual content in the Bible and violence and even harsh language, although a lot of that has been nicely translated out of English. But do some digging on that and you might discover some alarming new ways to read your favorite passages. But for me, it was about, to really simplify it, an approach to loving your neighbor. Growing up, I had been warned against movies. I had been taught to stay away from toxic worldly culture, but a lot of my friends were going to movies. I was fascinated by the reviews I would read in the newspaper, where I saw people intelligently approaching works of creativity, primarily curious about the story, about the people who made the film, about the people acting in the film and composing the music for the film, and just this creative collaboration. And what I discovered there were these meaningful conversations about how art of any kind expresses more than words can say. At its best, it can express things that are very difficult to paraphrase. And so even though I would have the summary of a movie, I had a sense that there was much more going on. And that aligned with my upbringing in church, where every Sunday a pastor might take a story or a parable I had heard many times, or a psalm, and open it up and discover that there was even more there to be learned. At the same time, and this was a curious dichotomy, a strange contradiction as I was growing up in Christian culture, I was encouraged constantly to read and to read widely. I'm grateful I had parents who encouraged me to read, a school that encouraged me to read. So even by the age of 10, I was reading The Lord of the Rings because I'd already read The Hobbit too many times. My parents were so kind of at a loss about what to recommend to me because they were not fiction readers or writers. They invited the high school English teacher to the house when I was 10 years old to talk to me about reading and writing, and he gave me my first copy of Watership Down, which I don't typically recommend for 10-year-olds. I don't know if you've seen that animated movie, but a lot of children generationally have been traumatized by that film. But when I would read these stories, I would sense that, wow, there's a lot of parallels here between the truths that I have been learning and the scriptures I've been memorizing in my evangelical Christian school and in my conservative Baptist church, and these stories that are being told around the world. They are stories about the wages of sin. They are stories about pride comes before a fall. They are stories about the corrupting nature of power. They are stories about the power of love, told in different languages, in different cultural vocabularies. And so I started kind of strategizing. I can argue that Winnie the Pooh is a sacred text. I can argue that the Muppet movie is a theological film. Boy, was I intent at 7 years old at arguing that Star Wars has deep Christian roots. And that line was partly selfish. I wanted permission to go to the movies, but it was also the beginning of a lifelong journey of discovering that what I was growing up in was a separatist approach to Christianity that says we have to withdraw from the world and create an alternate world and then just try to get people to join us, to do things our way, to speak our language, to sing our songs, to go to our movies. And instead, I was finding God already at work, or maybe even better, at play, in 1,000 ways beyond the borders of our little insular culture, and a lot more common ground than I had been led to believe I had with my neighbors for us to get to know each other. And that allowed me to start loving the world. I mean, the very first Bible verse I learned was John 3:16, right? For God so loved the world that what? He gave what was most important to him in order to connect with that world. This gave me a way to discover, to empathize with, to love the world, while also growing in discernment about right and wrong, good and evil, wisdom and folly. And what I found was the beauty and the truth and the mystery in realms of art where there was more freedom allowed God to speak much more profoundly. And as a result, I know this troubles some people, but as a result, the art and culture I have found beyond the borders of the church has done more to increase and cultivate my faith in a loving God than what I found in the church culture I grew up in. And that continues. So that first book was a response to all the angry mail. But since then, I have found such extraordinary responses to that, such great conversations all over the world with people going, yeah, I'm so glad I finally found somebody I can talk to about how the films of David Fincher have increased my faith, or Iranian new wave cinema God is speaking to me through that. And those conversations have taken me out of this sort of contentious dynamic, which is what the first book was written to address. And now I have the opportunity to tell some of these stories about maybe very unexpected films that have opened up new understanding of God, new understanding of the gospel, and new ways to connect with my neighbors. And so everything in this book, from an early chapter on the many adventures of Winnie the Pooh to an open letter to Jim Henson about his work with the Muppets, to My Neighbor Totoro, which I was not allowed to see as a kid, didn't know existed as a kid. I mean, it didn't reach American audiences until the early 1990s, I think, on VHS. Good. But when I watch that film, I understand my own childhood better. I understand what God was doing and how God was at play with me in my own childhood better. But the book moves chronologically into adolescence with movies like Moonrise Kingdom, Dead Poets Society. The Secret of Kells is a really important one to me. And then into movies that have helped me tear down walls of prejudice and fear and ignorance in adulthood, like Do the Right Thing, Patterson, Nomadland, Wings of Desire, and eventually like the pinnacles of cinematic theology, The Tree of Life, and let's face it, Marcel the Shell with Shoes On. So, yeah. So that's kind of the journey that got me to this book.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I won't guess at what generation you're from, Jeffrey, but my guess would be that I think we represent 3 different generations on the. I'm a millennial. Naya's she's a young Gen Zer, so I think it's interesting even just to see you can sort of the progression of like our different experiences with sort of that tension within the church. I mean, some of that's just been around forever, but some of the hostility or skepticism, but I don't know. It does seem like there has been, I don't know, like the church, the Christian community has, by and large, become a bit more open to, I think, approaching the arts through the lens that you're offering in this book as a method of actually engaging with beyond just, an empty vessel for content that we got to dissect, but to actually, dialogue with it. I guess you mentioned too that as you walk through your book, that it is told kind of chronologically. It starts of you as a child, kind of up until present day Jeffrey. I'm curious, this is your, especially as you've sort of been able to reflect back, through the process of writing the book. Um, just like, how is your experience? How is the way you've approached movies maybe changed? And I'm curious too, like, is it possible? Because you start with, things like Winnie the Pooh, which I would argue is timeless. The Muppets are these timeless treasures that you don't grow out of them. Definitely, you
I
just need
hope
to
not.
find different excuses to go watch. You just have kids, and then you can make them watch it with you. Is is the solution? But is it possible to still kind of go back to some of these, like as you go back and watch, like Winnie the Pooh or some of these early movies that you dialogue with? Like, are you still able to sort of see them through that lens initially, or does your experience of engaging films this way sort of permanently shift as you reach later in your life?
I think it's so important to stay involved with children's literature, children's media and entertainment, not just because you don't want to become a snob, but because I think it's harder to write for children well than it is to write for adults. Madeleine L'Engle, in her extraordinary book about faith and art called Walking on Water, I hope you know Madeleine L'Engle, the author of A Wrinkle in Time. That book, Walking on Water, means more to me than any other book that's been written about faith and art. And she talks in that book about how she has come to see her age as not an isolated statistic, but she says, I am also 5 and 7 and 9 and 13. This idea that your age is more like the rings of a tree expanding. You are all of those things and more. You didn't move from being 5 years old to being 7 years old. You built on those 5 years of experience with a 6th year of experience and a 7th year of experience. And so those early experiences are at the core of your experience. And that's sort of where things started. That's where those fundamental lessons happen. And just like with mathematics, it's important to keep the fundamentals strong, to keep going back to those places where the journey began, where the doors first opened. I love The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh even more now than I did as a kid. I love The Black Stallion even more now than I did as a kid, because like those parables or psalms or any work of art that's well made, it doesn't have a lesson. It's alive. I mean, the Bible talks a lot about, a living word. A living word means that there is truth and beauty at work there, and those go on speaking. So I still learn from those childhood stories, and I still go looking for great children's movies all the time. Sometimes they're hard to find because in any branch of art, there is a tendency to think, well, this isn't anything important, we'll just give it to the kids. Or there's this tendency to think that kids are just, all they need to do is be distracted. But there is profound literature, profound poetry, profound illustration, profound cinema for children that, if it's done well, it's going to speak as much to the parents as the kids. I think Pixar, in the golden age of Pixar, I think Pixar really understood this. The marketing campaign would be to get the kids on board, begging their parents to go. But then you'd go watch The Incredibles as parents, and you'd be sitting there going, what are they talking to me? Is this, there's stuff about the risk of infidelity in The Incredibles, right? There are all kinds of big, profound questions for parents there. And I think any good writing for children is that way. My favorite novelist going in America right now is Kate DiCamillo. She wrote The Tale of Despereaux, Because of Winn-Dixie. She's been doing a series lately that I absolutely love. One's called The Puppets of Spellhorst. I really recommend her work to you because kids will love it, but I think adults are going to have a sense that there are deep rivers of wisdom going on in these stories. So that's why it was important to me to devote almost half the book to childhood movies, because those laid the foundation that enabled me to appreciate a lot of what I'm paying attention to right now, which, I mean, like right now, I'm really focusing on movies from Iran because I think those are neighbors I'm supposed to be loving. And right now, based on headline news, it's really important that we be cultivating an understanding of our brothers and sisters, children of God who live there. So you look at Rabbit, for example, in The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh. Here's a character who is alarmed by a neighbor who offends him, right? The bouncy, trouncy, flouncy, pouncy one. And so he devises a plan. He organizes a group saying, we can't have this guy in our community. We need a plan to basically deport him. And so they lead Tigger into the woods and try to lose him because he's inconvenient. And what happens when they get out there? They realize they're the ones who are lost. And they need Tigger, who, by the way, isn't going to be lost, to bring them home. They need him. He has good things to offer. That's a pretty simple story for children along the way. But I look around now, and boy, do I see manifestations of Rabbit's judgmentalism, Rabbit's extreme. I mean, that's an extremely cruel plot for a children's story. Let's take one of our neighbors and take them into the woods and get them lost and then leave them there. I just saw the movie The Drama, and that plot actually figures in that movie. Somebody tried to lose somebody. So these things we shouldn't leave these things behind. We should realize they're the bedrock for how to love the world here and now.
Yeah, well, it's interesting too. I have two 11-year-old twin boys, so we're still we're right at the transition point of they're graduating to see more adult films but we still we'll go back and watch some of those, especially around at Christmas time. And I know we watched not all that long ago through like some of the Winnie the Pooh movies. It might have been the Christmas movies, but there is an interesting thing that happens when you return and you relate to this, the same truth, but you relate to it differently. And I know that, like, both my wife and I afterwards we're like, I think we're Rabbit. Like, it's almost like the prodigal son of, we think we're the Pooh, we think we're Tigger, we're the fun one, and then you're like, actually no, like I'm that's the chaos, the now that I'm a parent, or she's a teacher, a high school teacher, like that's the stuff that we're struggling with. And it's just in some of these stories there's wells to keep returning to. And I think you had a question just for some of the some of the stuff you touched on, Jeffy, as far as like the fear of the church response. I don't know now if you want to ask.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just wondering, this is more of a heavy question, I would say, but like with your past experience, like growing up with the church, basically like persuading people not to go to the movies, not to partake in pop culture in any way. This is like a multi question, I guess. How would you say that movies combat that fear? If you could talk to one person who represents that entire philosophy, what would you say to them?
Well, I do talk to them in the new book, actually. I mean, it's so hard to, I mean, I don't know how I would single out one person, but I can think of encounters I've had. I was on a Christian radio show once where they were talking about the publishing phenomenon of Harry Potter in the early days. And I don't know if you've seen these things, but there was a wave of reactionary publishing in Christian media about how the whole Harry Potter series was designed to lure children into witchcraft and Satanism. And I'm still looking for that one child who sold his soul to the devil because of Harry Potter. And what I find are countless children who learned to love reading, who found a story that helped them understand that they have an important part to play in the cosmic battle of good versus evil, but the same thing happened with Star Wars when I was a kid. I wasn't allowed to see The Empire Strikes Back on the big screen when it opened, and I was like the perfect age for it, 10 or 11 years old, because my church had become convinced that Yoda existed to recruit children into Hinduism and Buddhism and all the isms that nobody really understood what they were, so they just sort of grouped them all together. And I'm like, fear, anger, the way to the dark side are they? I was like, this sounds like Sunday school to me.
Mhm.
And then you get to Return of the Jedi, of course, and you have this profound, shocking moment in storytelling when you have the climactic duel between the good guy and the bad guy. And the good guy puts down his weapon and opens his arms in hopes of encouraging the good in his enemy, loving his enemy. Where do they get that idea?
I wonder.
But to your question, one person in the chapter on Do the Right Thing, which is called "And Then I Woke Up," which is one of those lines you're never supposed to write in a story because it's been used too many times. It's such a cliche, right?
It's a cliche for a reason.
Yeah, exactly. But that's a chapter about waking up to how even movies from other cultures that made me uncomfortable actually had a lot to say to me. And maybe that discomfort was the discomfort of growing pains rather than the discomfort of corruption. And I share in that chapter how I had recently, when I wrote that chapter, I had recently discovered a promotional video that had gone out with one of the big Christian movies that was opening. And I don't really need to say which one, because there are so many films just like this one. There is this idea in a lot of Christian media that if we can just sell Jesus, if we can just market Jesus and convince people that if they come to Jesus, nothing but happiness awaits them, nothing but victory awaits them. If they will just pray the right prayer to Jesus, they will win the football championship or whatever. They will get everything they wanted. That's a prosperity gospel. That's not the gospel Jesus talks about.
Mm-hmm.
But this motivational video that went out with the marketing materials for this film, the filmmaker himself sits down and he gives you 3 guidelines for Christian filmmakers. This is what Christians should be giving the world when it comes to art. Number 1, make sure it presents our worldview. We don't want movies with other worldviews. We need the movies to be a Christian worldview. I'm thinking, wow, that's like the total opposite approach of my film classes at Seattle Pacific University, an evangelical Christian university. I want my students to encounter the creativity and the expressions of what matters and the longings and the fears of our cultural neighbors so we can understand our neighbors. Because if we're going to love our neighbors, we need to understand them. So a lot of students come into my classes thinking, oh, this class is called Faith in Film. Are we going to watch a bunch of cheesy Christian movies? I'm like, no, I assure you. I'm pretty sure you're already familiar with those things, those very, very preachy films. I'm going to show you films that you can't boil down to a lesson, that are beautiful and mysterious, not perfect, what films are, but give us so much to talk about. Because where we really absorb what a movie has to offer doesn't happen when you're just sitting and watching it. It happens when you reflect on it, when you ruminate on it, when you talk about it with others. So that first point, make sure it presents our worldview. And then he said, point number 2, there should be nothing that could possibly offend people in this film. Wow. Well, I know a lot of people who are offended by evangelical Christianity, so that's going to be tricky. But how can your film reflect the world we live in if you're claiming to eliminate anything that could possibly offend? I can't leave my house without being offended by things. I can't get to my street corner without being offended by things. The world is full of offensive things. But if something's offensive, that doesn't mean it's wrong. It means it offends what my current understanding, my sensibilities. And a lot of what art is here to do is to break those bubbles with which we sort of insulate ourselves and open us up to a bigger world. Now, there are things that are rightfully offensive. There is, gratuitous violence. There is lurid material that appeals to our baser appetites. There are a lot of movies out there that encourage in us the things that are bad for us. And growing in discernment of those things is a fundamental responsibility for anyone, learning to use your conscience. But I can't read the Bible without being offended by things it shows me about the world. And Jesus did not go around trying not to offend people. He knew that any apprehension of the truth and of what's really at stake was going to be offensive. And I can't think of anything more offensive than this symbol of a cross, which was an instrument of brutal torture that people tritely wear as, jewelry because it's sort of a tribal identification mark. One of the moments that really opened my eyes was when I read an essay by an educator from British Columbia named Barbara Pell, where she talked about the cultural aversion to bad words, to foul language. And that study woke me up to the fact that a lot of my aversion to harsh language is that it is characteristic of the poor. It is characteristic of those who are desperate. It is characteristic of those who are in pain. And my aversion to it has more to do with my discomfort with being around people who are desperate and in pain and who are needy than it has to do with my desire to love my neighbor. People reach for harsh language when their emotions override their intellects, typically. And that seems to me like a point at which we should pay close attention. Why are they so upset? What might be at the root of this? What might they mean by this? And now I tell you, I'm so much more offended by the way Christian vocabulary is used to keep us separate from trouble, to express piety and superiority, than to express humility and love and truth. So that was point number 2. Point number 3 was, we just want to be entertained. What? Really? Wow. So are you saying Christian movies should not challenge us to think? Are you saying Christian movies should not challenge us to feel? Are you saying Christian movies should not leave us with questions that make us want more and make us want to come back and think through this again and discuss it? Those were the 3 points. None of them have anything to do with my film classes or with any of the experiences with art that have changed me, that have helped me grow, that have helped me love my neighbor, that have drawn me closer to God. And so when I saw that, I'm like, here in a nutshell is what I was led to believe as a child, that I increasingly felt like that doesn't make any sense to me. When the most pious religious people went to hear Jesus speak, they did not hear their worldview. They were offended, and they were not entertained, except maybe by some of those miracles they just kept wanting to see. So that's I'm sure a much longer answer than you were looking for, but that's one figure who stands out to me. Oh, and back to that Harry Potter example. When I was on that radio show talking about what I saw happening with Harry Potter, the guy who was the next guest on the show was the director of a major Christian media organization connected with the Christian Film and Television Commission. And he responded to my testimony about what I was seeing happening with Harry Potter culture. And he announced to the public listening to that radio show that I had never read the Bible. I mean, doesn't the Bible forbid us from claiming to know things we can't possibly know? And that clearly, even if I had read the Bible, I was just rejecting the teaching of the Bible. And that was it. That was his answer to my interpretation. And so I've had lots of interesting encounters like this. I was once speaking about, I think I made the same point I made earlier about how harsh language has kind of been translated nicely out of English translations of the Bible. And a woman sitting in the front row started shaking and weeping and shouting about how I was rejecting the idea that the Bible is the Word of God. I was like, well, you do realize there are many translations of the Bible. And you do realize that it did not come to be in English. And that was so threatening to her. I mean, it was like I was attacking her God by saying we need to be biblically literate. We need to read the Bible carefully and think about where it came from and look at different translations and think about the decisions that were made there. But at the same time, I could feel some empathy for her or some sympathy with her, because I remember those emotional reactions, those things that people would say that would challenge my way of thinking. And so I immediately assumed they had to be the enemy, rather than entertaining the possibility that maybe what God has been revealing to me along the way as I learn and grow might have some relevance for somebody else. So I hope that this book does not come across as that sort of pious condemnation of culture, but as a story of someone who very much embraced all of those very narrow ways of interpreting things, and has found that my faith has grown stronger and stronger by learning to overcome those fears. And the most common refrain in the Bible is not love God, is not love your neighbor. The most common refrain in the Bible is fear not. So why is it that when I ask people on the street, what's the first word that comes to your mind if I say evangelical Christian, I'm very likely to hear them say they're afraid. They're fearful people. Something's gone wrong somewhere.
Yeah, and I'll say too, like having read the book, and I love the way you start the book too, because having read several of these types of literature, that maybe I'm just preconditioned to expect the, film led me away from the church, and now we're going to hammer the church with all that gets wrong. And you don't take that approach. Your book is very graceful to, you're challenging preconceptions and ways of looking at film and looking at church and faith and what it means in a practical ways to love your neighbor, as opposed to maybe how that is actually practiced in reality today. But you do so with a lot of grace and I think an understanding. I think too, like and you just touched on it a lot too, but I think that resonates with me too. I've found that a lot of Christians, we almost conflate like it's sinful with I'm uncomfortable. And if we're uncomfortable, then therefore it must be sinful, as though to feel uncomfortable is in itself inherently bad. Because I know it's not a film, but one of my favorite like works of art is Immersion, like, or Piss Christ, as it's kind of more crudely called.
Sure.
And I know that's another one that, I mean, you show that to a room full of 10 Christians, and you're going to have at least 9 of them that are going to want to rip up the paper. And a lot of the reason for that is it makes me feel these strong emotions, and I feel, and my response is like that's the point. That's why it's good.
Yes.
It makes I feel something in me. I should feel something towards this, as opposed to a lot of what I see. And I think kind of one of the themes throughout, because obviously you touch on a lot of stuff as you trace your life through movies, but one of the major themes just seems to be the way that movies grew you by making you uncomfortable. Just the value, whether that's just like opening your eyes to a bigger world as a child, or kind of more recently to things like racial injustice and your own biases or prejudices, and just being shaken from. And I mean, that's what and I'm sure I would say the same thing. Like the things that have changed me the most with books or movies or music or whatever is the stuff that shakes you, the stuff that shows you a different perspective, which isn't really what Christians seem to want. Like I know you see it the most with like Christian radio, where a lot of the all the slogans are some version of safe and fun, or encouraging and uplifting. It sort of becomes this like therapeutic escapism of we go to Christian art, or just art in general, to feel good about ourselves and to kind of pat us on the back. Good guy. Christians win. You're good. You're okay. You're gonna make it. And I think there's definitely a place for that, but we don't often go for shake you. You're not okay. You're blind. You need to grow. Like that's the stuff that we maybe avoid. But kind of because again, you come at it from different perspectives in the book. But why is that important? And you touched on that a little bit, but just the ability of films, or really any art, just to make you uncomfortable, and like being comfortable with being uncomfortable in those situations.
Well, I mean, there are so many different kinds of uncomfortable. Horror movies, for example. Horror movies can be just scare tactics. We get so sort of numbed by the tedium of our routines, that some people want to go to a horror movie because it's going to make them feel something, anything. And that worries me. I remember a friend going to see a Quentin Tarantino. This isn't technically a horror movie, but a friend going to see Quentin Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs when it opened. And I don't know if you know that film, but there is a particularly horrifying torture scene in the middle of that movie that's kind of played for laughs. I find it extremely disturbing. And my friend went and saw the movie. When he came out of it, he just looked like he was on an adrenaline high. I was like, wow. So what did you think of that? He said, I loved that so much. That made me feel more alive than I have felt in a long time. And I was like, wow, if you need to see people carving other people up with knives in order to feel alive, I think we have bigger issues to talk about. So I don't want to pretend that movies can't do more harm than good. So much depends on the intent of the artist. So much depends on what the movie itself clearly loves most. I've seen a lot of movies that claim to be anti-war, but then they just invest all of their energy in dramatizing the spectacle of war that gets our adrenaline spiking. We can come out of that going, patting ourselves on the back because, yeah, war is terrible, but boy, I can't wait to see that again. Could you believe it when that guy, never mind. But at its best, what horror is doing is showing us things that we tend to overlook in the world that need attention. I mean, the scriptures tell us that we should have, in Ephesians 5, we should have nothing to do with the unfruitful deeds of darkness. That's Ephesians 5:11. Have nothing to do with the unfruitful deeds of darkness. And that verse was used in my childhood to tell me stay away from anything that has any evidence of evil in it. But there's more to the verse. Have nothing to do with the unfruitful deeds of darkness, but instead expose them. That sounds to me like a good practice when it comes to things like cancer. Have nothing to do with cancer, but study cancer. Learn how it works. Learn what cancer looks like on an X-ray. So if I watch a movie like Alien, probably my favorite horror movie, that is not a pleasant movie. That is a very uncomfortable movie about a creature that has no conscience, nothing but pure appetite. And these people encounter it and they start fighting it and they start learning the horrors of this soulless killing machine, right? And that's horrifying. But the story leads you on a journey to realize that the reason they're there, and they haven't been told this, the workers in a corporation being exploited. Imagine that. They're really there to bring this thing back because the corporation wants to weaponize it to gain more power. So who's the real monster? I mean, that's the Frankenstein question, right? Who's the real monster? Fortunately, in the new adaptation of Frankenstein, we don't have to do any thinking for ourselves. We have people shouting at Dr. Frankenstein, "You're the monster!" I'm like, oh, okay. So much for subtlety. But that's the function of horror when it's done well. It is to make us feel disturbed about things that we should feel disturbed about so that maybe we'll do something about it.
Are there any films or topics that you just refuse to watch at all?
Oh, yeah. I read a lot of reviews and I learn to trust certain critical voices that have a good sense of what's well made and what isn't well made. And most movies that I skip just because I don't think they don't look like they're very well made. They look redundant. They look derivative. They look like they're just there to entertain and like they're not inspiring much discussion. So I pay a lot of attention to the critical conversations to see what is encouraging people to think about things. But there's all kinds of things to avoid that are harmful, and developing a radar for that, I think is really is really important. I have a great, I mean, one of the greatest minds on this subject is Flannery O'Connor. She tends to be quoted in any sort of substantial conversation about faith and art because she says things so well, and she also says them with a certain level of snark. So that that sort of cutting edge, so that you can't ignore her. And she says this: the fact is that if the writer, or I'm going to insert artist there, or filmmaker, the fact is that if the filmmaker's attention is on producing a work of art, a work that is good in itself, he is going to take great pains to control every excess, everything that does not contribute to this central meaning and design. He cannot indulge in sentimentality. Uh-oh. There goes a whole lot of so-called Christian art.
Mm-hmm.
You know, making people feel things without earning those feelings. Thinking about what's going to make people feel good about themselves. That's sentimentality. He cannot indulge in sentimentality, in propagandizing. Oh. That means art is not marketing. Art is not trying to sell you something. Art is trying to ask things and discover things. He cannot indulge in sentimentality, in propagandizing, or in pornography. Well, I don't think you're going to find much argument there in Christian culture. But there are different kinds of pornography. There's sexual pornography. There's all kinds of art that exaggerates and misrepresents things to the harm of those who are drawn into it. And I think in Christian art, there are versions of that. And again, it has to do with selling people, you will get what you want if you come to Jesus. Mm-hmm. Your desires will be fulfilled if you come to Jesus, rather than this is the path of the cross. It's going to be difficult. You will suffer. You will be rejected. You will be mocked. However, let us show you a bigger picture about how even death will die, right? Mm-hmm. By the way, one of the insights of the Harry Potter series. Anyway, so sentimentality, propaganda, pornography, Flannery O'Connor says, an artist cannot indulge in those things and create a work of art. For all of these things are excesses. They call attention to themselves, and they distract from the work as a whole. So let's take, for example, a little movie you might have heard of called The Last Jedi. And then let's think about another movie that you might have heard of called The Rise of Skywalker. The Last Jedi does a whole lot of things that Star Wars movies haven't done before. And it challenges things we've become used to in the Star Wars franchise. It questions whether a maverick hero who runs off to do his own thing is really the best idea. It questions whether or not the rebellion against the Empire, the whole game, might not be rigged so that rich people can get richer. Really interesting questions that Star Wars has never explored before. It also asks the question of, can someone use the Force if they don't have a certain bloodline? Which I think is a really important storyline to bring to Star Wars so that it doesn't end up being used to advance white supremacy agendas and things like that. The Last Jedi made people think, and that made a lot of people uncomfortable. And it really offended a lot of Star Wars fans, especially males. The Rise of Skywalker is very much a reaction to the response to The Last Jedi. J.J. Abrams works very, very hard to go back to all the things that work, all the things that are familiar. He goes back to sentimentality, and he goes into just a whole lot more of the things that a lot of Star Wars fans just want more of, rather than digging deeper and making new discoveries. Now, The Last Jedi isn't perfect. I have my complaints about it. There are scenes that don't work for me. But I was so furious when I saw The Rise of Skywalker. I'm like, this has been one of the most meaningful storylines in my lifetime. It was formative for me as a child, and I'm still being challenged by it today. And you just did everything that won't surprise me. You just did everything that just doubles down on really what was not most important in Star Wars, but what was most familiar in Star Wars, what was most entertaining in Star Wars. That's my opinion. It's a very big debate, but it's an example that comes to mind when I think about the differences between a work of art and a work of entertainment that has been designed to make money by giving people what they want.
Well, it's interesting too because you mentioned. I'll say from the start, I'm not crazy about really either of those two Star Wars movies, uh, but since I've been doing reviews for the Collision, and to date, The Last Jedi is the only movie where I actually went back and watched it a second time, like m- before I did my review. Because I saw it the first time, I was like, I just don't know what to think. This is
Yeah,
this
yeah.
is nothing. I didn't need to do that for Rise of Skywalker. I pretty well knew what I thought after coming out of the theater, but that is like I need to at least. I feel like I didn't understand. It wasn't what I would expected. I need to see it again with fresh eyes. So I actually went back and saw it again before I did my review. Which again, I'm not necessarily crazy about that movie. I think it's grown on me a bit, but I think this the testament of the fact that you had that I wanted to watch it again is
Yeah.
separates it from something like Rise of Skywalker that I don't necessarily didn't want to watch the first time. But maybe kind of last question, and I can let you because I think it's something that you had pulled out in the George Lucas sphere. We can go to some Spielberg, but why don't you ask your
Oh, so I saw that there's a quote that has really stuck with you that James
Yeah.
Lipton, yeah, you know exactly what I'm talking about. He was he was talking to Spielberg about Close Encounters, I believe, and he said, "So for you, a picture of hope is the reconciliation of science and art. His music played through machines," and this was in reference to Spielberg's parents, one who was a musician and another was a scientist. So my question to you is, what is the picture of hope for you in specifically in film terms, but also just in general?
I mean, this is what I wake up thinking about every day. It's like, what have I seen recently that gives me hope? But there are so many that stay with me. And these are the films that I work into syllabuses of film classes, is because I want back to what you were saying, Daniel, this idea that you didn't know what to think. A poem is designed so that we read it and we're not sure what to think, but we sense something's going on in there. So at the end, we go back to the beginning and we read it again, and then we talk about it, and we read it again, and we look at it with this lens, and we look at it through this lens, and we start seeing more and more and more. So learn to trust that sense that I don't know what to think, but I want to see it again. That usually means the movie has a lot to say to you, maybe for years to come. So the things that have stuck with me, the things that give me hope, that every time I go back to them, I am moved, I am challenged, I notice new things. I mean, just a couple of examples. I'm going to go to one from very early in my experience, the Muppet movie. Believe it or not, that is a profoundly hopeful, spiritual film for me. I relate to it on many levels. Here was a guy in a swamp, sort of looking up at the sky and dreaming dreams, and all he needed was somebody to come out of nowhere and give him a ticket, basically, and say, you should follow these dreams. You should go in this direction. So Kermit sets out. In my experience in the arts, most people who have set out and are going for something feel very, very competitive. But what's very interesting about Kermit is that he invites the first idiot he meets along the way to join him. And then he invites someone else, someone who has visions of being a diva. I wonder how much influence Miss Piggy had on Lady Gaga in the early days. So they just seem destined to do a movie together. And now I hear that Jennifer Lawrence and Emma Stone are actually working on a Miss Piggy movie. Gonzo the Great comes along. I mean, this freak of nature, who nobody really knows what he is. And then several movies down the line, we find out he's an alien. He invites everyone who has this desire to use their imaginations and be a part of something beautiful, to make millions of people happy. He invites them all into this this quest, and the community grows and grows and grows, and with each new person, it has new capacities. There's even this crazy drummer who seems to have no impulse control, named Animal. They bring him along. And in the climactic scene of the film, when the evil forces of exploitation and commerce and commercialism corner the Muppets and say, we want you to become part of a commercial enterprise, to sell something, by the way, that is offensive to Kermit. Because he had that inclusive, welcoming spirit, he has a community that will stand with him and that will push back. And what ultimately happens, and I think this is hilarious, is that a character with no impulse control saves the day by, without thinking, taking drugs. This is not a lesson, by the way, I hope kids take away from the Muppet movie. But when you really think about it, I don't know how well you know this movie, but in the big moment, when the day is saved, it's because a guy with no impulse control found a bottle of pills and swallowed it. And that results in saving the Muppets from the commercial villains. And they go to Hollywood, and the doors just open for them because someone who has wisdom looks at them, sees the potential of what they want to bring, says, I haven't seen this before, and just rolls out the red carpet for them. And that seemed like wishful thinking to me. But the lessons I took from that movie had a lot to do with my own creative experience. I kept writing stories. I did not pursue publication. I looked at how you do that, and I got really discouraged, and I just kind of gave up and said, well, I'm just going to do my own thing. I'm going to write my own stories for my friends. And I just kept working on those stories. And someone read one of my movie reviews in Christianity Today, asked me about my fiction, looked at it, passed it to somebody, and I got a call right here in this room in 2004 from the director of a division of Random House. And he said, a friend of mine is really interested in your fiction, says I should look at it. And in 2007, both Through a Screen Darkly and my first fantasy novel, Auralia's Colors, were published. And by 2011, the whole 4-book series was published, and I kept thinking about Kermit. I kept thinking about, I wonder if his influence had anything to do with the fact that I just kept pedaling my little bicycle in the direction of an audience. And by being willing to share that vision with anybody, in this case it was a flight attendant from Atlanta who responded to my film review and who then passed this along to a friend of hers. That's how it happened. And I look back at the Muppet movie and I say, this is about somebody achieving their dreams, not by being stubbornly focused on just what they want, but by inviting a whole community of dreamers. That's hopeful to me. That's where originality comes from. That's where joy comes from. Similarly, in Babette's Feast, which is a very different movie, an art film that won Best Foreign Language Film at the Oscars back in the 80s. This is about a French refugee who is basically rescued during the revolution by a very puritanical community in Denmark. And they ask her to serve them the food they have learned to eat, which is like the most boring food on the planet. They don't know that she was a gourmet chef in France. And I don't want to spoil much, but let's just say she comes into some money and she decides to use it to thank the community. So she invests in a French banquet for them, and they think she's a witch. When they start looking at everything she's doing in the kitchen, it's very unfamiliar. It's offensive. It's terrifying. So they have like special prayers and they try to protect themselves from this threat from the outside. And then they taste her food. And it blows the world wide open for them. And that too was my experience. I had good teachers who came along who said, you should read this, you should watch this, and then let's talk about it. You should listen to this music, and then let's talk about it. And it proved wrong all of those things I'd been taught to be afraid of, all those lessons about how toxic the world is. And it showed me that God is out there doing things that will just blow my little mind. So those are two examples of things I've encountered in movies that give me hope. But I've made a lifetime of looking for those things and writing about them, and there's so many more. A lot of them are in this book. To me, the centerpiece of this book is a chapter about Wes Anderson's Moonrise Kingdom. I think that film, in a way, is kind of an allegory of my experience with Christian faith. But you'll have to read the chapter, or we'll just be here all day if I keep talking.
It is amazing though how just, I think film, I mean all stories, but films are just very visceral in the way that they present it. Just sort of give you a framework to almost understand. Like I know, and it's not. I think as you shared, I guess not always even the films that you would think. Like I know I go back to Jaws. That's my favorite movie of all time.
That's a
And
great film.
and
Yeah.
I mean I go back to that all the time for things in my life. There's so much in that story that I resonate with. On like
It's
a
right
spiritual.
here. It's right over my
There it
shoulder
is.
on the shelf there. Yeah.
Yeah, Emperor's New Groove and Jaws. That's you're at +2 on that. But yeah, it's just the films that you don't necessarily think of, but oftentimes I think this is like Brody. Like this is my moment crossing into the water, facing the shark. There's so much to that. So yeah, again, we're going to encourage you guys to read the book. But before we get to the end of the episode, we do have to end as we always do with our favorite segment, which is things we like that you should like too. So Jeffrey, you as our honored guest, so we're going to give you the floor. Usually I share very profound stuff and Naya shares, she scrapes the bottom of the barrel. So we'll see where you fall on that spectrum of Naya to Daniel with what you have to share. So what is one thing, Jeffrey, that you like that you think other people should like too?
I mean, I feel like that, again, I feel like that's my whole life, is recommending things I like that I want people to like too. I mean, I could go in the direction of how to find the great discussions that will wake you up to so much that's going on in the world of movies. I'm a big fan of a podcast called Film Spotting that's been going for many, many years. I just think it's the best podcast on film out there. But I'm going to try to stick to movies. I don't usually publish my best films of the year list until February or March of the following year, because it takes me a while to see everything, but also it takes me a while to really understand what I think about things. Like you were saying earlier, that sense of, I don't know what to think about that. So how do I publish a list, just as the year's ending when I've only just begun to think about some of these things? So the film that I ended up putting at the top of my list, and I'm careful to say it's a list of favorites, these are the best movies. I don't think anybody in the world is qualified to say what the best movie of a particular year is, because what subjective units of measure are you using? And have you seen every film that came out this year? I don't think so. So I would say that my favorite film of last year that I hope more people will see is actually a film from Zambia called, and it has a title that's not going to sound very exciting. It's called On Becoming a Guinea Fowl. Guinea fowl are funny little birds that get spooked easily, and they make these little hooting sounds to try to alert one another that there's danger. But this is a movie set in present day in Zambia, where a woman who has left behind her traditional Zambian culture and joined the corporate world comes back and discovers her uncle dead in the road just outside of town. And she goes into town, and the town is waking up to the fact that this man has died. And she knows what other women in the town know, that he was a relentless sexual abuser. But because of the patriarchal culture, because of the tradition, because of how evangelical Christianity has changed their culture and become a dominant part of their vocabulary, there are systems in place to protect the abusers. You don't talk about the hard things. You don't talk about the painful things. This man has died. We have to honor him. He was a great man of God. Yikes. So she starts going around trying to comfort the women who are re-experiencing their trauma now that this man is being praised everywhere. And I'm sitting there thinking, what a great film for Americans to watch right now. What a great film for the church to watch right now. Because look at how the language of our own faith is being used to ignore the suffering and silence them, and is being used to praise someone who was the worst representative of these beliefs. And it's a discomforting film. It's also a very funny movie at times. It's reassuring in that it shows just how much we have in common with cultures that we might not think we have much in common with. But there's something also about how it kind of simplifies the conversation and makes you feel for these women who have been harmed. That makes me think we need to watch this and talk about it right in the middle of this season of debate about the Epstein files. It feels incredibly relevant here and now. It's also beautiful to look at. The music is incredible. The sound design just kind of blows my mind. There's so much that's cinematically inspiring about it. And it doesn't boil down to one easy lesson. There's so much to talk about here. So that was my favorite film of last year, in that I think it's one that I want to watch with large groups of people and then have big conversations about it. And I hope some people will check it out and try that.
Did you see
So
that
that's
film?
my pick.
I have not seen it. I think my wife, she might have seen it. I remember when it came out and just some of the conversation around it. I just wasn't able to make it to. So did you see the film? That seems like the
No,
kind of
but
film you
it
would.
sounds familiar. I
Yeah,
want to
that's-
watch it.
It's
that
easy to
seems like a
find
film that'd be
streaming
there.
now, yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. I'll check it out.
Yeah, well, definitely recommend that, and of course recommend Lost and Found in the Cathedral of Cinema.
Oh,
a
yeah,
book that depending on when this episode releases, either is just about to come out or just came out. So I think May 12th is the
May 12th.
release date. So
Yeah.
so Cody, this is a great book. I read it on an airplane to and from New York. Ate it up, enjoyed seeing your journey digging into film. I think I learned a lot, and I'm someone that's read a lot of these kind of books, so I encourage you guys to check out that book. Jeffrey, is there anywhere like for people to follow? Obviously, we'll link to this book and then your other books, your novels as well. But any other ways that people can sort of follow your work and kind of join with what you're doing?
Absolutely. I mean, I just recently moved my creaky old shipwreck of a website called Looking Closer to a new platform. So it's very easy to find me at jefferyoverstreet.com. There's a wild idea. How about that? jefferyoverstreet.com. That actually works right now. It has the archives of all of my film reviews going back 25 years or more. It's kind of a mess right now because there were a lot of things that kind of went wonky when we went on the platform change, but I'm repairing that as quickly as possible. But I'm also posting new stuff there all the time. I just posted a review of the drama. I just posted a 3-post marathon of reflecting on the great films of last year. So that's where you can find me. And I mean, I wrote this book hoping to start conversations. So if I'm not hearing from people about their own stories, I'm disappointed. That's what I want. So please write to me at overstreetreviews@gmail.com. And you can follow me on Letterboxd, where I post my impulsive first impressions about things. I'm at Joverstreet, just J Overstreet, like one word, on Letterboxd. So it'd be great to meet your listeners and hear about the movies that have been formative for them. Maybe I will discover some new favorites that way.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And again, recommend this book. It's not just, I think people will learn from your insights, but I do think it also just offers a framework for people to think about their own life and the films that have formed them and kind of their own journey through cinema. So recommend that book. Thanks so much, Jeffrey. It was a pleasure to hear your wisdom, your experiences. I'm so glad that you were able to join us, and so glad that all you guys were able to join us as well and tune in. We hope you will join us once again, as always, next week for more conversations on faith and pop culture.